Welcome to another episode of the TechnoWizards podcast. For those of you who don't know, we are the TechnoWizards team 16458, an FTC team in San Antonio, Texas. My name is Vincent,
And I'm Aditya.
and today we are joined by Robokings team 12993 from Queensland, Australia, out of Chancellor State College. They have competed in FTC for 6 seasons and have advanced to Worlds 4 out of the 5 seasons they have competed. Current students are the third generation and have recently competed in the 2023 Houston World Championships, ranking first in their division, being one of the 3 teams to go undefeated in qualification matches. And this season in powerplay, they were the winning alliance captain and Inspire Award winners at the Australian National Championships and the winning alliance at the Asia Pacific Ocean Championship. They also hold a top 3 OPR and a top 5 high score.
So, can you give us a brief overview on your team and how you started and what drew you all towards creating a robotics team?
Well, starting the definition of Robokings, the first Robokings, they did a lot of marketing and outreach within our school. So they recruited us from when we were in the younger grades of high school. And so that's when we joined robotics. Our first season as a proper team where we were competing competitively was Freight Frenzy.
A lot of our students did FLL before as well. So in our school, we do FLL from usually grades 7 to 9. And then 10 to 12, we do FTC. But there's been some exceptions. So I started FTC in grade 9 and Tinko started in grade 9 as well. So there's that. But yeah, Freight Frenzy was really our first year. And then Powerplay is our second year. We've tried to expand the current generation of the team from there.
We got really motivated to try and do well. At the end of Freight Frenzy, we did qualify to Worlds, but unfortunately, due to school policies, we were unable to attend. So we went to MT instead, and seeing the level of competition really motivated us to.
Yeah.
So you rapidly became a really improvement in as a team.
Yeah. So we went from we ranked first at our national competition because it was remote in Freight Frenzy, and then we couldn't go to Worlds as a team, which was very disappointing for us. So when MTI came around, we're like, all right, we have enough time to prepare now. We can go independently. So we started fundraising, marketing, etc., etc. And we did basically a 4-week redesign from Freight Frenzy Nationals to MTI. So completely from scratch. And we didn't do the best at MTI, but yeah, going there motivated us heaps for next season.
The 4-week redesign definitely worked about as well as you would expect it to.
Yeah, but we learned a lot.
So when the season starts and the new game is revealed, what are some of the your first planning steps that your team does to ensure that you're going to build the best performing robot?
Well, as soon as the game comes out, we try and think super far ahead into the future. Like, what will teams be doing at the end of the season? What will the best robots look like? And then from there, we'll obviously work our way backwards. So we'll start with prototyping. We try and get as many members of the team involved in prototyping. And then we have our CAD designers who, well, we like to CAD the whole robot from scratch like a lot of teams, but we'll think very, very in-depth about the packaging of components. We'll consider multiple design options as well and weigh up the pros and cons of all of them. It's a pretty standard design process, I'd say.
The only thing that would probably be different is that we have to really fast track that area because our first competition is 6 weeks after kickoff and we qualify for Worlds, or we find out whether we qualify for Worlds in December.
Yeah.
So we're generally bringing just a wooden MDF prototype to nationals, regionals, and then we'll probably rebuild that for nationals.
Yeah. It's a bit of a race at the start for us, but we are still trying to think of the best design. So this season, we actually redesigned our robot from nationals to a design that took more time and effort to get right and optimize.
So what are the exact stages that you go through when designing a mechanism on your robot?
Well, first we do a lot of sketches, so to figure out the packaging of components, and then it's straight into CAD. So we'll CAD it all up. We like to do a quick build through of the first initial CAD in cheaper materials, because usually there's something wrong with it. So there's holes that you haven't included, or it's hitting another part that you haven't seen in CAD. So we'll do a super quick rebuild with that, using 2 screws where we could have used 4, things like that, because we know it's not going to be the final. we'll fix up anything in CAD, and then we'll test again. And if there are any major flaws with the design, so we didn't weigh up the pros and cons correctly, we realize there's a better design option, we'll go back to CAD, do it again. And then we spend a lot of time in that stage trying to find the perfect solution. So after we've done our initial testing, we'll spend a lot of time doing the CAD right.
After we have a subsystem that actually works, we'll work out what the limiting factor in performance is. So is the arm not fast enough? Do we have to drive out a little bit more to be able to score properly? And that's when we'll start really optimizing that.
And you said you really like testing. How many iterations have you gone through?
Well, it depends. We go through different amounts of iterations for different subsystems. I think we did about 10 iterations of our claw for our redesigned robot. We've done the drive base 4 times, the outtake entire about 7, and the wiring, we've rewired our entire robot 7 times before Worlds as well.
Yeah. But it's also it was also a bit of a learning process for us. So that's why it took so many iterations. And it was quite a complicated robot as well that we built for Worlds. So.
And with these iterations, you have to experiment with different materials. How do you determine the right materials that go on your robot, and what are some of the benefits and drawbacks to using certain materials?
Well, we kind of know from testing with MDF, because it's a weaker material. That's what we have access to. We have a laser cutter on MDF at our school, so that's what we use for prototyping. But because it's a weaker material than the final products, for example, we use aluminium because that's also what we have access to from a sponsor. It becomes very clear what parts will break. So if it's breaking in MDF, then you probably still want to do some minor changes to increase the structural integrity of it before you go into aluminium, even though the aluminium final design will be significantly stronger than the wood part. So those flaws become apparent. For us, there wasn't many cases where we would need to use a stronger material than aluminium. We use aluminium 5052, so it bends a little bit. There were some places there where we were thinking of trying to find some carbon fiber for the rigidity. So it's roughly 40% lighter than aluminium and 4 to 5 times more rigid, but we couldn't source that, unfortunately.
So when it comes to mechanical design, what factors do you prioritize to make sure that your robot excels to compete with the game?
We set pretty ambitious design goals when we did our rebuild. So we didn't want hardware on our robot to be a limiting factor at Worlds. We wanted it to be the optimization and the software components of it. So yeah, we set really ambitious design goals and then work from there basically.
So the type of drive chain that you use during the season, so 6-wheel swerve mechanism, do you change it after each year depending on the game, or do you just stick to one design?
Yes, we do change our drivetrain every year. So for the past several years, we've just used Mecanum wheels, but we do reevaluate at the start of every game.
Yeah.
Okay, so continue.
Well, sometimes there is a pretty clear option for each drive base. I mean, it's pretty obvious to teams, if you look at the game.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when making your robot, what were some of the design tweaks that helped improve in the game, performance-wise?
Well, one of the major ones we went through at the start of our redesign was we actually changed our entire drivetrain to move all of our motors and batteries forwards. This is because we had a really heavy system on our outtake. So if we wanted to be able to drive quickly, our robot would tip. So we had to redesign so all the weight was closer to the front so we could drive as fast as possible without tipping. That's just one example.
We also ended up mounting our battery underneath our robot as close to the forwards position as possible, which...
Although we don't recommend that for teams. It's very inconvenient to be changing in between matches.
Yeah, it is. But we had to do that so it didn't tip. That's one example.
It had to work for us.
So during this season, what led to your decision to have both an active intake and as well as an extending intake?
So from as soon as kickoff started, the active intake was one of our first thoughts on the game, and it was that very super compliant surgical tubing because we knew the cone was not so compliant. So we did some early prototyping with 3D printed the cone and did a lot of early prototyping with an active intake. And then when we put it on our regionals and nationals robot, we did see performance increases, especially in consistency. because it vectors the cone into the claw, it was a lot more consistent in taking the cones into the exact same spot every time. So we wouldn't get any misgrabs. And then when we were reevaluating our design for Worlds, we realized that reducing movement and getting good autonomous was obviously a priority for Worlds, consistency-wise. So we knew we needed to have some sort of double extension. But we also super liked the active intake that we had at the start of the season. And we knew that driving like for the close low junctions and maneuverability was a huge thing, and we couldn't just rely on that one row of the field tiles between the poles that most teams with extension just try and fight for. So we kind of just kept the active intake, and to do that we had to move the claw backwards more further into our robot, because most robots with extending arms, they have their claw stick out of their robot. But that was a pretty big design challenge for us, having the claw inside just behind the active intakes.
Okay. So are either of you on the software team? Can I ask like software related questions?
Yeah, you can ask me software questions.
Okay. So what were some of the software features that increased your robot's accuracy?
Well, we did a lot of, closer to Worlds, we did a lot of loop time optimizations to try and get our loop times down. I'm a pretty new coder, so this is the first year I've done coding, but I had to do all the software for the team. So we spent a lot of time doing like fixing all our double rides. We had pretty sloppy code actually at the start of the season. Like small things that we hadn't noticed, like stopping our camera streaming after autonomous, things like that. We coded in a lot of redundancies as well. So in Telliot, we had a manual reset. Like if any of the encoders messed up, the servos messed up, we could always reset it manually and then press a button, everything would be reset. There was a lot of sequences we did in Telliot. So like automation, obviously. So picking up using the extension was slightly different. It was a different sequence to picking up using the active intake. And then picking up, if you know our outtake, we can pick up cones from the stack or from different poles using our outtake that scores. So that was a whole nother sequence because the brace needed to be tucked under before we could drop it down. So timing those sequences, like making sure there was no conflicting commands, making sure all the states in our finite state machines, it wouldn't send it into any glitches or bugs. That was kind of just a long process of tuning it. Like it's pretty easy to make a change to the code, but it just took a lot of tuning to make sure that none of the sequences were in the way of each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. So do you guys use any sensors to like make the robot more optimized or efficient?
Yeah, so we have a limit switch on our claw, so we can detect when the cone is in when we're using an active intake, so that the intake and transfer process is as quick as possible. And we also use odometry for autonomous.
Yeah, we use the Axon analog input as well for the servos, which especially for our intake servos, it really helps speed up the process of transferring by like a second or so, because we wouldn't have to guess the servo's position based on timings. We could check the position of the arm and stuff. So we knew exactly when to, change the grip of the claws because the arm had been just reached that position. So that saved us a lot of time as well.
So when building the robot, you need to make sure that the programming team and mechanical team are collaborating. So what were some things that you guys did to make sure that you guys are on the same page?
Well, in our case, the programming team
and the mechanical
team. Well, I do all the CAD for the robot, and I also do all the programming for the robot. And then my sister does basically all the hardware stuff. So there's not really much of a clash there.
We kind of just have to work together.
But for teams that aren't like that, then I would recommend you need to, like, especially when you're CAD designing a robot, you need to think about programming in mind. So like even for our nationals robot, we incorporated a turret because I knew it would be a lot easier to program if we could just have the turret doing all the heavy lifting, and it'll be a lot more consistent if you can keep a static heading during autonomous. So that was the whole idea of autonomous consistency for us at nationals with the turret. So small things like that, and then also sequences as well. If you do coding, or if you're a CAD person who doesn't know coding, work with the coders and see what they would like on the final design, because it makes everyone's life a lot easier.
All right, thank you.
And in some matches, there's like really little time to fix certain parts in your robot. And I know like our team even had as little as like 10 minutes until the next match. How does your team ensure easy accessibility to certain parts in your robot, like wires?
Well,
It gets hard when you have a super complicated robot. So I think we had like 13 degrees of freedom or something like
14.
that. So it was really hard to make sure everything was super modular.
We did all of our wiring completely custom though. So we had two connections where there could be an issue. We had all of our connections near our rev hub connected to the base of our turret. And then the other connection on the wire was at the servo, secured exactly to the flat side of the servo. So there was no movement on the connections that we did have. And everything else was just hand braided custom wiring. So stuff like that meant that we could pretty easily diagnose an issue.
Yeah. Usually our issues between matches were with wiring. So because everything else was pretty strong on our robot, like enough structural integrity. If there were parts that like did break,
it was the polycarb parts that we had added on hardware, so we always had spares and we could switch them out with a couple of screws.
Before we packed for Worlds, we cut like 4 or 5 spares of each of the polycarb plates that we knew were failure points on our robot, and we ensured that they were modular and easy to replace on our robot.
And if anything does go wrong in a match, like a mechanical failure, what does your team do to like minimize these risks from happening in the actual match?
Well, we do a lot to work on minimizing failure points, and the best way to find your failure points is obviously by testing. So for example, this season, if you get a cone stuck in your robot and you can't get it out, that's kind of the end of your movement in a match. So what we did to stop that was we just kept chucking cones in our robot until we found where they got stuck, and then we would just get 3mm polycarb and we'd use a heat gun to bend it into a shape that fit on our robot, and we'd secure it on with screws until we found no places that any cone could get stuck. We kept practicing and trying different driving techniques until we found bugs in our code or states that didn't work. And like Tinzan previously mentioned, we also have the manual reset mode. So if a cone gets stuck or one of our servos gets caught, we could just reset it and go back to the start.
Yeah, so we can move the cone out. That actually did happen to us at Worlds, where a cone was stuck after autonomous, and it was a simple like 5-second extend the slides out, move the turret a little bit, cone falls out, and then keep driving. So, but yeah, we've like with the robot so complicated. We like to think we've done so much work with it, and we're so familiar with like because of all the iterations and the final design that any issue like possibly that comes up, we know exactly how to fix it. Yeah, we've already encountered it before, basically. Like, so it's a pretty easy process of fixing. And I think, oh yeah, sorry.
Sorry, go on. You can go.
Well, I think it doesn't really matter how complex your robot is. Like, if you've gone through that time, you can always fix it.
And that's probably got to do like with a lot of your driver practice. And I'm not even gonna lie, like our team has spent like 0 time doing driver practice. So what do you think like is the importance of that? And what are some like strategies that you do in driver practice to ensure like success?
Well, he's our main driver and I'm the secondary driver on the robot. So we've done a lot of drills to practice in every single scenario.
We do a lot of driver.
There's a curve for driver practice. We had it on our FlySet workshop presentation that we did. But essentially, the more driver practice you do, the more your robot's gonna work faster. If driver practice will really probably make or break your performance. If you look at our robot before Worlds and then right until APOC, there's a very big difference.
Yeah.
A couple of things we do.
Like we was like before Worlds, we got a solo max with a 1+5, like just in time. And then after Worlds, after all the driving we did after Worlds and like preparing for APOC and stuff, we didn't think there was much of a difference, but we got like solo max with like 20 seconds to left. So even though we didn't really notice the difference, it was pretty huge just from all the extra drive practice.
We always try and practice in high pressure environments as well. So that's putting on loud music and versing other opponents. So leading up to Worlds, we had matches where we would have one of our team members stand on the opposite side and act as 2 robots that we would drive against in timed matches. So the goal of our opponent they would always be faster than us, just a little bit, because that sense of competition will always drive everything higher.
Yeah. So we basically did exclusively 1v1s and 2v1s. Humans were playing defense. They were getting in the way of us, and they're always just a little bit better than us.
That also helped us figure out what strategies worked best.
Yeah. Another note I'll add for teams that your drive team is separate from your coding team, make sure your drivers work very closely with your coders as well, because from what I've seen on other teams, there is a bridge there that like usually the driver knows what he wants or she wants in the coding aspect. So if you just listen to them, it makes life so much easier. And yeah, being smooth with your driving. So a lot of teams do a lot of jerky movements with their joystick. So they like to flick the joystick. In our experience, this is not the way you want to drive. You want to be as smooth and utilizing the analog, aspect of the controllers as best you can. And then once you get that down packed, you can start doing it at higher speeds. So if you can be super smooth at high speeds, then you have driving down packed, and you're less likely to bump into poles, things like that.
And I know that communication is like really important while driving. And I know some teams have even went as far as like having a specific name for each junction. Do you know what are like some of the methods that your team does to improve like communication, or do you have like a certain like, I don't know?
We definitely do a lot with that. We had a lot of issues with communication leading up to Worlds, but we practiced two main things. One, we have a communication hierarchy. So our main driver always has the final say on the robot. Whatever he says goes. So there's no conflicting commands. And our main driver will listen to our coach, and our secondary driver will only listen to the main driver. So that way, the secondary driver wouldn't try and do something that the coach wanted to do that the main driver didn't want to do. The other thing that we did was we tried to drive silently with our two main drivers. So our secondary driver should be able to read the robot and should be able to know how to control and what to control without even hearing any communication. So working silently and getting good working silently meant that in matches when we did have the added layer of communication, our performance only got better.
Yeah, and a lot of the matches at Worlds, like, it was pretty intense. You couldn't really hear anything as well. So that helped us pretty immensely, like just observing the robot when you're driving. Yeah.
And obviously your robot performance isn't the only thing that matters because you have an alliance. How do you like strategize with your alliance depending on like what type of robot they have to have a good performance as well?
Well, first of all, when we were designing the robot, we tried to take luck out of the equation for our qualification matches, like as much as possible. So the goal behind our robot was actually a 1+10, which we didn't really get because of a few software issues. But consistent 1+5, and then basically being able to do everything else that like your partner can't do. So get every cone and telly up, get from the stacks, whatever, So that's the first step. Secondly,
well, yeah, we always try and have solo max. So everything, we can do everything on the field, and then anything our alliance adds is just a bonus. We try and talk with our alliances beforehand. So we'll work out where they want to work on the field and where we want to work on the field. And saving which cones and stuff. So just having that communication with your alliances.
Before each bowl match at Worlds, we would have talked to our alliance partners like 2 or 3 matches ahead and established a pretty clear game plan depending on our opponents. And we would always try and work to the strengths of our partner as well. So that's a big thing. Like, we didn't really have a preference of driving side because we'd done practice on both sides. So if they had a specific side that they were strong at or an autonomous that they were strong at, we were reliable enough so that we could let them run their strong side. But if they were really good at going ground junctions or the junctions at the back, we would let them work towards their strengths so we could fill in the rest basically. So that helped us in consistency.
And going back to like some of your previous seasons, what have you implemented during this season to have like improved your robot from previous seasons?
Well, pretty much everything. To be completely honest, if you look back at our previous seasons, our bots were definitely a lot more simple. But the main thing probably is wiring. We really worked a lot on optimizing that this season because we had about 14 degrees of freedom. So wiring was definitely not an easy thing to do. So with our wiring, we tried to, as we mentioned before, reduce our connection points, reduce torsion, reduce movement and stress on the actual wires because they can and will break.
And they did break.
Under movement.
Like wire casing as well, making sure that you can, try as hard as you can to make sure that a wire is easily replaceable.
Ferrite chokes from
ferrite
Roy.
chokes. Yeah. Make sure you use a grounding strap, like things like that. It's pretty simple stuff, really. But that was probably the biggest improvement that we've had, consistency wise. It's like usually when a robot fails, like 70% of the time it's wiring. So yeah, in our experience at least.
So congratulations on being the winning alliance captain at the APOC. So what was the experience like for you?
It was amazing.
Amazing.
The brainstormers were there. There were a lot of international teams there. There were some really good
Mhm.
Indian teams there. There were good Romanian teams there as well. It was a super fun comp.
It took the stress out of FTC. We just come back from Worlds. We wanted to have something where we could just enjoy, really.
Yeah. We also learned a lot from Worlds as well. Like we upped our scouting a little bit.
A lot.
A lot, because our scouting was one of our weaker points at Worlds. So we knew we had to find good alliances. And then we had a match against the Brainstormers, and we ended up picking them first. So they helped us a bit as well. So it was just fun. It was good.
So yeah, overall, what do you think is one thing that being on the team that you would never forget?
That's a hard one.
Probably 1v1ing the Brainstormers at APOC. or Worlds,
Worlds.
like the ending up first at Worlds was pretty big as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't like we were aiming, like our expectation coming into Worlds was to basically win, right?
That was our goal,
That
not
was
our
our goal.
expectation.
So
Our expectations were a lot lower, but
yeah, but we were planning on it, and for it to actually, we didn't actually win, obviously, but like ranking first was a pretty big
Pretty damn
achievement.
good.
So for a new FTC team, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to them on their journey?
Probably like the biggest thing is it's pretty simple actually. Like FTCs, it's all about like the time you put in is basically the performance you'll get out. And it's dependent on your skill level, your experience, of course. But if you put that extra time in and you know like what you want to achieve, then you will get the results you want, usually.
yeah.
And iterate a lot as well. That's the other thing.
We had a couple of sayings during the season. We'd go, no sacrifices. So we would never, ever do anything that could sacrifice our performance on the robot. We'd always have to try and find a workaround. And speed equals performance. So that's the speed that we're building, the speed that we're working, and the speed that our robot goes, obviously.
Yeah. And have fun, obviously.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, that too.
If you enjoy the process, then you'll probably spend more time with it and you'll do better. So
So what's in store for the future of your team?
we will most likely do FTC next season, with a similar team to what we had last season, with a couple changes.
Couple people gone, couple people coming in.
Yeah, a lot of us, like a large portion of our members are in grade 12, so that's the senior year of Australian school, and we have like big end of year external exams, basically midway through our regionals competition. So
we qualify, which is very convenient.
That's going to take away a lot of time from us, which is unfortunate, but
yeah,
hopefully we'll still try our best if we do it.
Even if we don't, our team number 12993 will definitely still continue in our club.
Yeah, and we'll definitely be mentoring as well. So, we're going to have 3 other Robokings teams as well this season. So we'll be known as Robokings Gold instead of Robokings Alpha.
We had 2 teams last year. We had an alpha beta system, but because we have 3 teams, we don't want to make it alpha beta gamma. So we're transitioning to colors.
Yeah.
So funny question. If you could design an FGC game, what would you want it to be like?
Like personally, I like FTC games where there's a high separation between the super good teams and like the good teams, and more creativity in designs generally allows this. So if the robots all look the same at a high level, then there's not much of a separation there. But if like a unique design will work to a high level, then I generally like the game. So I think Freight Frenzy was a good in that aspect, and even this season was pretty good in that aspect.
Games where it's a lot harder to max out are definitely better.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our podcast today, and we'd love to keep in touch with you. And we can't wait to see what you accomplish next season. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
You too.